Hello, I'm Ron Franklin for Bassmaster's Classic Yearbook. Professional bass fishing, like all pro sports, has that one quintessential event everyone dreams of winning. But unlike most other sports, you don't have to be a professional to fulfill that dream. 1994 was the working man's year in classic history.
I think one of the greatest anticipated classics I can recall was the 1994 Classic, High Rock Lake. There was a fever about it because everybody had watched the drama take place, and one man was sparkling in the dark more than anybody else, and that was David Fritz.
Tremendous, tremendous young man. David Fritz, defending champion of the Bassmasters Classic.
Well, after winning the '93 Classic, David Fritz went on one of those world-class rolls, and he just dominated the tournament trail like few people ever dominated before. And you had to figure that he was the man going into the 1994 Classic on High Rock Lake.
I'll never forget that. Fritz was the huge, overwhelming favorite. That's his backyard. He had so much pressure on him. There's never been that much pressure on one guy.
You're pressured every day that you go out there and fish. There's pressure. But when you got all, just like Woo Dave's at the James River and David Fritz at High Rock Lake, I mean, you got all those spectators coming out to see you, and they're all expecting you to do well. So it puts pressure on you. I mean, you feel the pressure. It's kind of riding on your shoulders.
And of course, you know, history shows what happened. He got in there, and he was probably as sharp as he could be under the pressure. But here again, remember, home lake advantage sometimes can work against you.
I probably could have won that Classic, but there again, I go to High Rock Lake and there's 70 to 100 boats everywhere I go. It's like a tournament blasting off every time I'd move. And I can't blame the folks. They were just wanting to watch, you know, but it ended up hoodooing me in the end.
He didn't complain about it. He never used it as an excuse. But, you know, for the kind of fishing he was doing, which was relatively shallow cranking, it just played havoc what he was trying to do.
There's no question. I believe that hurt David Fritz's chances. But it also opened the door for a young fellow like Kershaw to step in and do what no other amateur has ever done.
The greatest story probably of all, I guess, would be the story of Brian Kershaw.
Brian was an amazing young man, had a very troubled youth, as many people go through, but just a real troubled time. And then he was introduced to fishing.
I think he'd said he'd gotten into drugs and was headed down the wrong path, but he got excited about bass fishing, and he really had something to live for.
Just touches you when he talks about what fishing meant to him. So he started fishing in a little teeny bitty pond close to his house, and from there found out about the Connecticut Bass Federation. He was from a place called Newtown, Connecticut.
The Bass Federation is the grassroots of fishing, in my opinion, and of the BASS tournament trail. I was a member of the Federation, a member of a club before I started fishing the tournament trail, and I'm not so sure I'd have a job professionally fishing if it weren't for the Federation.
Somebody that has a job, okay, can belong to a club and become competitive and obviously go through the whole series of progressive tournaments to, in the end, fish the Bassmasters Classic.
Brian did it, and then he wins the whole thing. Incredible story.
Obviously a tremendous victory for the Bass Federation. First angler and only angler to win the Bassmasters Classic, qualifying through the Federation.
He kicked the door open on dreams of every young man anywhere in the country that dreamed of doing what he's seen the big guys do.
Look at this guy. He just went through the whole ranks and made it and won it. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that. So all of a sudden, you turned all those dreams into a reality.
It was a Cinderella story, and to have such a tragic ending, which just wasn't fair. It wasn't fair to the sport.
Brian Kershaw was the best fisherman in the world, and he never really ever knew it.
The 1994 Bassmasters Classic Yearbook is brought to you by Busch Beer, Chevy Trucks, the most dependable, longest-lasting trucks on the road, and Triton, a new breed of fishing boats by Earl Bentz.
In 1977, we took a trip, family took a trip to visit my father, who had a cottage on the Fox River in Cary, Illinois. And Brian, being a young kid, was always looking for something to do. He took this rod out and on the end of the dock and started fishing and started catching catfish.
It was almost as if that awakened something in him. From that day on, he had a passion and a love for fishing that never ended.
I think it was about 1984 when he subscribed to Bassmaster magazine, and I remember him coming down the driveway and he had his copy of Bassmaster magazine with Rick Clunn on the cover. Rick had just won another Bassmasters Classic.
And at that point, he realized that was his dream, that becoming a professional bass angler and someday winning the Bassmaster Classic was a dream.
So from 1984 until about 1990, it was all like going to school. He would go out to Taunton Lake.
That lake really became a second home to him. He learned to bass fish there. He studied bass fishing there.
And the really great thing about it was when he was going through middle school and high school, those were pretty tough times as far as drugs in the school, and fishing was a way to get away from that crowd, and he would take some of his friends fishing.
But it was much more than fishing to him. He'd go there at night if he was disturbed or upset or just needed to think.
It was a place to go to be peaceful sometimes when, you know, his drive wasn't necessarily to find out where the bass were or to get that tug of catching a trout, you know. Sometimes it was just to go and contemplate. He was a thinker. He definitely enjoyed time with people and time alone. Just found peace there.
His job was at the ground round, so he would go to work at 4 o'clock, get off at 12 or 1, come home, go to bed, get up early in the morning, go fishing all day, come home in time to go to work at 4, and that was his life. He basically fished during the day, worked at night.
He was the one who would always lean forward between the hot plate and the grill and help me out, and just with a twinkle in his eye, and that's where the crush developed.
I believe in dreams. I never look at life with limitations. So when you see a passion in someone, and clearly Brian had a passion, I feel that should always be supported.
So then he became more methodical about, well, what is it I need to do to get this process started?
It was like a game plan almost, and he never sat down with me and said, okay, look, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do this in the Federation, then I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to win the Classic. But in his heart, I think he really believed that that's all he wanted to do, and whatever he has to do it.
I know a lot of people had some strange reactions. There are a lot of people that as he went along, said you can't become a professional fisherman.
He said, I want to be a bass fisherman, a professional bass angler like Rick Clunn. That's what I want to be. I was just thinking to myself, wow, he's not going to make it. He's dreaming like I did, like we all do.
You know, I would have told him he was crazy, but when I tell most people, a lot of people, you know, think they're going to be professional bass fishermen. I usually advise most of them against it.
You could give him every, like, dream kill scenario. Say, Brian, you know, you're not going to make any money doing this. You know, you're going to be living in your truck. You're going to make 20 grand a year. You can't live like that. Yeah, but that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to fish.
Didn't listen to negativism. I really got the impression that he didn't even hear it. He didn't even hear these statements.
And so I never had a moment's doubt in supporting him in following that dream, even though I really didn't know what the end would be.
Brian joined the Housatonic Valley Bassmasters Club in summer of 1990.
He got in a bass club, and of course that helped him even further, and then went on to win. He was top gun in his club, and then went to the state, and was top man there.
Came and fished his first national event, qualified as a member of the 12-person team from the state of Connecticut in 1992. He was so shy, he was so afraid to come across the weigh-in stage.
That insecurity around the unknown, around strangers, or even not necessarily strangers, just sort of putting himself out in front, carried all the way through his life until the last 2 years. The Federation was Brian's family. He realized what that meant to the local angler, the fact that there was an organization and that they provided the opportunity to tournament fish as often as they do. You know, that was his home, the Federation.
Brian, in that 92 divisional tournament in Maine, was the top angler on his team, and so therefore he was invited to go to the 1993 Federation Championship that was in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. Now, Brian didn't win that tournament, but he was the top fisherman in the Eastern Division, the top of those 13 at that point in time, and made it to the Classic.
And qualifying through the Federation, I have news for you. That is not easy. I believe, in my mind, that it's harder for a guy to qualify for the Classic through the Federation than it is through the pro ranks.
The Federation anglers, we've competed against Federation anglers in as long as I can remember. And, you know, there's some of the pros that really, in a sense, I guess, didn't feel like those guys really deserved to be there. I don't know, because they didn't make the Classic the same way we do.
If you're good enough that you belong in the Classic, you fish the Federation, you'll get there eventually.
These 5 Federation representatives have never even fished like a Bassmaster 2 or a Top 150. You know, they've never even been in that kind of pressure. And when you get to the Classic, the pressure's magnified 1,000 times that. He finished dead last in that Classic, and I probably hardly would have noticed him except for a good friend of mine by the name of Gary Judici, who's got a good eye for spotting fishing talent, said to me, "You need to watch this kid. This kid really has something."
I had taken kind of an interest in him because of some magical personality. I don't think he realized what it was, but I did take an interest in him.
You see it from time to time in our sport, somebody come on into the sport and he has a charisma, he has a quality that you can't put your finger on it, but there's something special about that person.
He didn't do well in the first Classic because he tried to fish the way other fishermen were fishing that lake at the time.
All of the pros are talking about what the patterns are and how they're going to catch their fish. And so Brian just listened. He said, I'm going to do that pattern, and he did. For 3 days, he stuck to that pattern. Now the pros, are being pros, switched to different patterns because that one didn't work.
If you don't do better than one bass, you'll be flipping hamburgers the rest of your life.
He says, I'm never going to do that again. I'll never do that again. I'll never fish in a way that I feel like I should be fishing. I'm going to fish how I want to fish, how I know how to fish.
I think what put it all into perspective is if you check on the records, I think Rick Clunn was second to last. You know, all right, you didn't make the right choices, but you know what? One of probably the best anglers in the world didn't make the right choices that year either.
Me, I'd be heartbroken. Most anybody I know would be heartbroken. But to him, it was a great experience, and he gets to go through this whole thing again.
He had already qualified to come back to his divisional championship in 1993. Again, he was the top angler on the Connecticut team. Again, he went to the national championship in April of 1994. And this time, he was not only the top angler on the Eastern Division, but he won that tournament. He became the national amateur champion and went back to the Bassmasters Classic, the first Federation angler to go to the Classic 2 years.
This time, Brian decided he wouldn't let the pressure of competing in the Classic affect him. He would enjoy himself, fish on his terms. His relaxed approach worked. After catching back-to-back limits on the first 2 days, Brian found himself leading the Classic going into the final day of competition.
But I can remember just as plain as day the mental makeup that Brian had entering that final round of competition, and he was just so focused on what he was going to do and just on his own little world. It was just him and his red shad worm and the boat docks at the mouth of Second Creek.
His technique, his approach, the way he was swimming a worm around those docks, I don't think anyone else was doing it. That's something that had worked for him. He had a lot of confidence in what he was doing. Going into the last day with a lead, if you're insecure about what you're doing, you're in deep trouble.
The The 1994 Bassmasters Classic Yearbook is brought to you by Chevy Trucks, the most dependable, longest-lasting trucks on the road. Skeeter, performance fishing boats. And G3, a great catch.
On any given day, anyone that's at that classic can win, because if they couldn't win, they wouldn't be there. They wasn't good enough to qualify. They wouldn't be there.
There were some things going on that were very different from any other classic I've ever fished before. He was being led around by a spiritual force other than himself.
When he was out pre-fishing, he was having problems. He wasn't finding the fish. And he was getting discouraged. So he decided that it was time to take a nap.
Woke up relaxed, and this is in the afternoon. And as he's sitting there in the boat, starting to think, he sees this little red worm float by the boat.
So he picked it up, and he thought, I'll try this. He had tried every bait that he had brought with him, everything, and nothing was working.
And he said, well, somebody's catching fish on this. So he tried it, and that was the bait that was going to work. He knew that bait was going to work, and then he started catching fish. So when he went into Classic, he used that bait.
You've got to keep in mind this wonderful outlook he had on life. He carried a little whistle in his pocket. Every time he'd catch a fish, he'd blow this little whistle.
After Brian won the Wrangler Bass National Championship in April of '94, he came back and he was fishing local Connecticut Federation tournaments. And he was paired one day with Roy Rickus.
It was a toy, basically, a little toy fish whistle that Roy always carried with him. He had bought it at a bait shop somewhere, and he thought it was cute, and he kept it in his pocket and carried it around with him all the time. So that day, when they were out fishing, he gave it to Brian. He said, you take this fish whistle, and it'll bring you luck.
And Brian wasn't really one for lucky pieces or good luck charms, but he took it and took it to the Classic for Roy.
That is why he was blowing the fish whistle, because he had a friend who gave the only thing he had to help him, and that meant more to Brian than anything.
Here you go, Roy. When Brian came in that afternoon with his fish, it was very close between him and Tommy Biffle.
I just knew I'd won the Classic. I mean, you know that you'd won. We even shot a deal at the lake, what it was like to win the Classic. That's how sure that we were.
Rick Clunn came over to him and said, Brian, and he apparently had heard that Tommy Biffle was coming in with close to 19 pounds.
And we didn't know who had won at that time, and I said, congratulations. I said, no matter how it turns out, you know, you did the best you could.
Well, he said, the only thing that I've worried about this week, or that has concerned me, is whether it's too early to win.
I really understood that when he made that statement, that he was afraid he'd won it too soon. And I knew that he was a very wise spirit in a young man's body.
Towards the end of the weigh-in, one of the fishermen came up and told his relatives back that Tommy Biffle had won it. And I said, no, don't worry about that. Brian's won it. And he came in second to last.
We need 8 pounds and 15 ounces to see if you're going to win this tournament. 11 pounds, 4 ounces, mark it. There you are, 37 pounds and 7 ounces. He's taking the lead by 2.5 pounds.
He knew, and everybody kind of knew, that it was down to him and Tommy Biffle, and it was close.
And he had a huge, huge sack of fish, huge. They were big.
He's got to have 19 pounds and 3 ounces. He wins. If it's less than that, well, he loses. Kershaw wins. And he doesn't make it. 18 pounds and 13 ounces, but it's still a great job.
And Tommy Biffle held his fish up, and he didn't quite win. And at the same time, you had a moment, it was like a fleeting moment of poor Tommy, oh my God.
There he is, folks, first man ever, 23 years old, as your winner.
I was so proud of him, and it was kind of like one of those moments where I felt almost shy of him myself, like, who is this guy? Under my nose, he'd been a teenager with doubts, insecurities, ambitions, dreams, and now here he was, a man in his element.
All of the things that frightened him in his life, including flying, he really had overcome those, and he just, you know, was really ready to shine, and I guess he's done.
At 23, Brian Kirchhoff became the first amateur to win bass fishing's World Championship. His accomplishment gave inspiration and hope to Federation anglers around the world. On the verge of living his dream to become a professional angler, tragedy struck. He was killed in a plane crash on his way home from Greensboro, North Carolina, where he had made an appearance for Wrangler, one of his corporate sponsors.
Right away, after the plane crash, there were a lot of people that were calling Bass and wanting to know where they could send flowers or what they could do. And we talked to Don Corcoran and said, perhaps we ought to set up a fund that we can use for children in his memory.
Brian loved children. He loved working with children. He loved being with children.
Brian understood as he was growing up what fishing had done for him. It allowed him to develop his personality, to develop his self-worth, his confidence. It allowed him to become a man.
This is what he would have wanted. He would have wanted the support to go to the children who are growing up and having dreams and learning who they are and getting a sense of themselves.
And he saw the value, how valuable that was in his own personal development, and he wanted to share that with kids.
And that's what we're going to do with what we received from the Federation and what we're able to raise. We're going to give kids the shot. If fishing's for them, that's great. And if it just ends up being a hobby or a chance to bond with other kids or to learn something about conservation on the lakes, that's great too. But that's where it belongs.
He accomplished everything that he wanted to, but the impact that he had, because of the life that he chose and the length of time he chose to spend here, is probably having a more significant impact than had he not passed away.
If Brian Kirchhoff's career was a brief moment in time, the impact he left on the sport is permanent. Brian's Cinderella story is an inspiration to all Federation fishermen, and his foundation is reaching many of today's youth. All weekend fishermen, they saw Brian achieve his dreams. Now they chase their own. For Bassmaster's Classic Yearbook, I'm Ron Franklin.